Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this session with Juliana Flowers about preparing taxes as an artist. My name is Hernan and I will be the facilitator for today's session. I want to also bring up to your attention that we have simultaneous translation interpretation from English to Spanish. So as I speak, you will be able to hear either one of our interpreters, Nefeli or Camila, translating what I'm saying into Spanish. So if you need Spanish interpretation, please, now is the moment to click the button that has a globe, looks like a globe on the bottom menu and says interpretation. Please click on that if you need Spanish interpretation assistance. I will say the same in Spanish for folks who need to hear it. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Hernán. Voy a estar facilitando la reunión de hoy acerca de impuestos para artistas. Quiero decirles que si necesitan la opción de interpretación en español, por favor hagan clic en el botón que parece como un globito terráqueo en la parte de abajo del menú, en la parte de abajo tiene que estar por ahí, hagan clic ahí para poder tener acceso a la interpretación en español que va a estar sucediendo simultáneamente. ¿Sí? So I will just say a couple of things to prepare the floor for getting started. Again, my name is Hernán Darío Jourdán. I will be facilitating today's session, led by Juliana Flowers, who is joining us from Philadelphia to talk about how to prepare taxes as an artist. And I want to, once again, I will say that for those who need Spanish interpretation, please, now is the time to click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a globe down on the bottom of the screen, and that will take you to the Spanish track where you'll be able to hear what I'm saying in English or what Juliana is saying in English into Spanish. If not, yes, please just remain on the English channel. You don't need to do anything. This session will be structured in the following way. We will have presentations by Juliana, and then we will also take time to ask questions and hear directly from her on what advice she can give on any particular topic. So there will be a series of presentations with questions and answers. And I encourage everyone who wants to ask a question to do so. Please raise your hand if you feel comfortable doing that, or drop it in the chat. And please, when you're asking your question, do so slowly so that our interpreters can catch up with you and interpret simultaneously at a good pace. Yes, how cool. Thank you so much for joining again, everyone. I want to also acknowledge that we live in a time of reckoning, about 200 years, 400 years, and of continual efforts to erase different histories and cultures. And I want to encourage everyone to see in which ways we can work as artists to highlight our stories and other people's stories that have been erased through white supremacist efforts. So that being said, I do want to also let everyone know that this session will be recorded and it will be made available for a short period of time for folks who cannot attend. And I would like to now introduce Juliana Flower, who is a tax preparer, For years, she's been doing that. She's also an amateur musician, and she's wonderful. I'm so glad that she can take the time to help us with this tricky topic. Juliana, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, Hernan.
Mhm.
I'm very happy to be here to try to give some insights into the kinds of things that you should be considering when you're getting ready to have your taxes prepared, whether you do them yourselves or whether you have somebody do them for you. And there are a variety of ways that that can happen.
Mm-hmm. So before we dive into it, I also want to encourage folks who are attending, if they feel comfortable sharing your camera, that's helpful for us, because body language is still a very important communication resource. And I appreciate seeing all your faces. If you can do that, great. If it's not a good time, I totally understand, but I do want to offer that. So thank you for those who are able to do that. And now, Juliana, I do want to give you the floor. I know you have a lot of important things to say, so go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I would love to see your faces too, if only to be able to tell if anybody's looking particularly bored or puzzled or like they got the answer to their question, or you put your hand up because you want to ask something. That's often very useful. So I want to start with why we pay taxes, because there are a certain number of people who don't have a regular 9-to-5 office type job or job in a restaurant, who think, the IRS doesn't know about my income. I don't need to tell them about it. But there are actually a lot of good reasons to pay your taxes, besides the possibility of getting caught and then getting in a lot of trouble and owing a lot of money, because they will charge you for not filing. They will charge you penalties and interest for paying late. So you want to avoid getting in trouble, but there are other reasons as well. If you do not file a tax return, you have no money going into the Social Security system, which means that once you get older and you're ready to retire, you may not be able to retire unless you have a bunch of money set aside in a retirement fund, but you won't get any money from the government, or at least you won't get money for those years that you don't file taxes. So that is an important reason for every individual person. There are other things as well, things like healthcare. If you file a tax return and you don't have any other way to get healthcare, you can now, through the Affordable Care Act, get healthcare, frequently subsidized, and our taxes help to pay for that. The recent bipartisan, as they insist on calling it, infrastructure bill that's helping to pay for a lot of things, including things like the bridge that just collapsed in Pittsburgh, and our highways, like the highway where everything was all clogged up in Virginia and people were stuck there for 12, 14, I don't know how many hours during the most recent snowstorm. There are also things that we don't have control over that we may or may not like. We all know that our tax money goes to pay for the military. It also goes to pay for social services like Medicare and food stamps. During the pandemic, if you didn't file a tax return and you didn't know that you could ask for money, for the money anyway, you wouldn't have gotten a stimulus payment. We all pay taxes on the federal level, and many of us pay on the state level. Not every state has an income tax, but in our area on the East Coast, we have income tax. And we also, some of that money goes to pay for things that happen locally, because the federal government will give grants to the state government The state government will give grants to local governments, and they will help with all the stuff that's happening near you. So it's not something that's way out there that doesn't affect you. It affects everybody. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, is that there is a reason to pay taxes, even if you feel like you shouldn't have to. So what I want to address today is what different kinds of income might be for an artist, what kinds of things are deductible for an artist, expenses that would be deductible, what kinds of forms are involved, what kinds of forms you will be getting from other people, and what kinds of forms you'll have to complete having your taxes done, what you need to have available to you, what information you have to be able to get your taxes done, and what the final process of tax preparation looks like. So that is sort of in a nutshell why I'm here.
I think it's also important for Juliana to know a little bit about each one of us, the people who are in the room. It's important to know what kind of practice do we have, because that will help her determine what kind of deductions each one of us can probably make. And I'll start. We will do short rounds of 1-minute introductions. And if we can talk about our practice very briefly, that will be helpful to inform the kind of content that Juliana can offer. I will say for myself, my name is Hernan. My pronouns are he and they. I am a tricky artist because I do write it. Yes, you can also type it. I see a question in the chat. I do writing, but I also create performances and events like this one today. So for, let's say, every meeting that I have with an artist, I tend to keep receipts because some of those things might be deductible. And, you know, if I go to the office store, to the library, and I buy some pens or paper, I also keep receipts of that because I know that stuff is deductible also. So if we can do this popcorn style, and I will pass it on to someone, and then that person can pass it on to somebody else. Please unmute yourself and say something about your practice, or even if you have, you know, maybe a question that's related to taxes too, in this sense of, this is my practice, this is what I want to share, please do that. I will start by calling Alexandra. I see you are unmuted, so if you can go ahead and introduce yourself, I'll appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm Alexandra Brockus, and I'm a photographer. I'm a member of Hera Gallery, so whatever information I get will be useful for my friends and fellow artists.
Wonderful. And if you can choose a person to pass it on so that they can listen to
Elaine?
Hi, I'm Elaine, and I do visual arts. My interest here is I'm a recent transplant into the state. So I would just like to hear what this state requires, and if you make a sale outside of this state, with reporting within this state, and maybe a couple of other questions. So I'm transplanted from New York. So it was very different there than it is here. This is like a foreign nation to me. So I like to pass that now to, how about Maria?
Oh, Maria is one of the interpreters, but come on and say hi. Wow, what a Friday. Yes, so Nefeli and Camila are helping us with the translation, with the interpretation. So they are in the Spanish channel. So Elaine, do you want to pass it on to someone else?
Sure, how about Serena?
Hi, Elaine. My name's Serena Mitchell. I'm a visual artist. I make paintings. I'm based in Providence. I'm probably gonna start doing a little bit of painting while in this meeting just because it actually helps me focus. I really like learning about the tax stuff because it really stresses me out. It's a huge source of anxiety in my life. Every year I do my own taxes, and every year there's something new that I learned that I didn't know the year before, because as a self-employed person, it's different every year too. So I always love attending these workshops because it really helps me. And I also love learning about it because it helps reduce the anxiety to like tackle it head on. Oh, and I should pass it to Zadie.
Zadie, my pronouns are they, them. I'm a printmaker, and this past year was my first time trying out an online store. And I mainly wanted to do this because I don't know, I feel like I had heard that under a certain amount you don't need to file for or something, and I didn't make very much. And what I did was pretty much almost entirely donated. So I wasn't really sure what I would need to do with that. It was mainly for fundraising. Yeah, it's not my primary source of income. I also work at a coffee shop, but for future reference, just in case, thought it would be good to know this stuff. So interested to learn. And how about Max next?
Max, we can't really see you and we cannot hear you. If you are there and you're able to come onto the floor, please do so. If you can only type at this moment, you're free to do that also. And maybe in the meantime, I will pass it on to MP, if that's okay.
Yes, hi. Hello. My name is Magali Ponce. I'm bilingual, so I can understand. I'm originally from Chile. I just arrived actually this morning to Providence for experiencing the big storm that is coming up. But I teach 3D and sculpture in Massachusetts. And through my job, I write artist grants, and when I get them, it sort of complicates my quite a bit of my income and my taxes accordingly. Most of the time, the school takes the deductions prior to depositing it for me. But at times, what I've encountered is that if I do get a grant from outside of the school, I have no deductions, or at some point my accountant said that they could run me as having a business on the side, but that could only be sustained at a loss for 5 years. So if I've had a practice of like 20 some years of being an artist, that's been something that I've done at some point in the past. And I would like to find out if, how is it that you reconnect to that? Basically using what you were talking as an example of deductions of going to museums or doing research, buying art books or materials and all of that. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I know that you guys were quite busy. So thanks for facilitating.
Well, it's great to hear from you, and welcome to Providence again. Do you want to, so at this point I see Ko Nyan and Christy Sherman. I see that Ko has shared something in the chat, and so I will read this for us so that we all can hear it. Ko says, my name is pronounced Ko. I am an author, writer, editor, journalist, dancer, performer, and notary. I haven't been saving all my receipts, but I've charged my expenses on my credit card. Please help me. I think that was simultaneously translated. So, oh no, that's fine. That's great. Thank you for being cognizant of the bilingual environment. Christy Sherman, are you able to hear us? Do you want to say something about yourself?
Sure. I'm Christy. I'm down in Richmond in the woods down here. I sculpt in polymer, mostly animals, sometimes at a miniature level just for jewelry. I'm kind of like looking at taxes. I've been doing it for a few years and I want to make sure I'm doing it right. And I also want to make sure I'm at that point where I think I may have to start doing it as a hobby because the last few years have been breaking even or at a loss. So I just wanted to find out about that.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So it seems like most of the people who are in the room have introduced themselves, and I appreciate that. Thank you for being present in the space. Again, I will remind us all, if we can share what we say in a slow pace so that our interpreters can have a better chance of doing their job, that would be great. With that being said, I think, Juliana, would you like to get us started with all this information that we have received? I know there's a few ways that we have identified in terms of how we go about this conversation. So would you like to get us started now?
Sure. First of all, I'm going to introduce myself, although Hernan did a good job. I just want to say that I worked for a number of years doing administrative work in nonprofit organizations. I've done some like behind the scenes tech and props and stuff like that for theater companies. It's been a long time. I'm a very amateur musician, but I do love music and I do love the arts. And so most of my professional life has been spent doing work that is in support of the arts. I'm not a creator, but I hope that my skills are useful. The little tagline that I think of that I have on my business card is, you make the art, I'll worry about the numbers. So that's kind of what I want you all to be able to make your art, and I want you to not have to worry about dealing with the numbers when there's somebody like me here who can help you. I'm not the only one. Obviously, there are many people who can help with your tax preparation. But there are a number of us. I work in a collaborative of people in Philadelphia, Philly Tax Prep for Artists. And I think every other one of them is, in fact, an artist, a practicing artist, or was a practicing artist. But we're all doing what we do because we love the arts. We think it's very important. And for me, this is what I can contribute. So I want to talk first about different forms of income. Somebody wrote, MP was talking about writing grants. And Zadie mentioned that she works in a coffee shop in addition to doing her printmaking. So there are all kinds of ways that you can earn money as an artist. You may have your whole life planned out, and what you do is make art, and it supports you, and that's great. You may have to keep track of all of that income yourself, and so that and that's great too. You may get a 1099 form to it's hard when people ask you to do multiple things to say yes, right? Yes, I agree. You may get a 1099 form from somebody that you've done some work for, or that you've sold something to, and they have not taken taxes out of that. You may work in a coffee shop or in a restaurant or in a movie theater or someplace where they actually do take taxes out, they consider you an employee, and the tax form you'd get from them is a W-2. So different forms of income could also include things like unemployment. During the pandemic, a lot of people had unemployment compensation. So those are things that we don't ordinarily think about sort of on a regular basis, but a lot of people have had that the past couple of years. Grants are one thing. You might also get a fellowship, which is something else. So there's a lot of different ways that you may be bringing in income, and different kinds of forms and things that you would be getting for the work that you've done, or you need to be thinking about keeping track of all of that yourself. You should keep track anyway, but sometimes you need to keep track in detail because somebody else isn't doing it for you and sending you a form at the end of the year. So the difference between an employee and an independent contractor or a freelancer is something that's actually determined by the government. And it's based on what kind of control the person who's paying you has over your work. It gets a little complicated. I'm not going to really address a lot of the differences now, but when you have a W-2 job, it means that you show up on certain hours and you do the job and they're supervising you, and you don't have that kind of level of independence that you would have as, say, an artist who is being paid for a commissioned work. So those are sort of the different, because as an artist doing commissioned work, you have total control over the time, the materials that you use, how much time you're spending, and where you do your work. So there's differences, and it's important to understand the differences so that you know what to expect at tax time. An independent contractor who does not have taxes withheld from their pay should put aside money to pay the IRS and the state the taxes that you'll owe. Because if you get to tax time and you don't have the money, then you have some problems with the IRS. So it's also something that's really important to keep in mind. If your taxes aren't being withheld, remember that that income that you have, you will be paying taxes on it anyway. There are various things that are affected by your tax return. For example, I mentioned Obamacare earlier. Any kind of subsidy you might get for buying healthcare through the marketplace will be based on your tax return from last year and from this year. And when you report your income at the end of the year, if you have overpaid the amount, if they owe you more subsidy, then you'll actually get that money. If, however, you made more money than you thought you were going to make, you may owe them money. So that's something that a lot of people don't understand when they do their tax return. But that's something that's based on income, and something to keep in mind if, in fact, you get health insurance through the marketplace. Not every state requires you to have health insurance. Massachusetts requires you to have health insurance. And I believe Rhode Island also requires you to have health insurance. So if you don't, you will be penalized, financially penalized for that. So if you don't have health insurance, you might want to consider the marketplace. Do any of you have children? No? Okay, I can't see the people I can't see, but if you had children, I'd talk to you about the advanced child tax credit, but I don't see that. So no, I won't worry about that. Did any of you receive a paycheck Protection Program or PPP loan during the pandemic? No. No. Okay. Okay. Great. All right. I just want to go back through the chat to see. Right. Serena mentioned, go ahead.
PPP
You did. Okay.
non-repayable loan, just for the sake of
Yes.
the example, if it's useful, or to ask me
Okay.
questions, I'm happy to.
Sure. Sure. Was it forgiven?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. I'll mention this to you real quick. We'll talk about it when I do your taxes. But that money is not taxable. However, you still have to report it to the IRS. So if any of you actually did, anyone who didn't respond did get a PPP loan, be sure to report it either to a tax preparer who will help you do that, or when you do your taxes yourself. That can be a reason to get some help with doing your taxes. And Serena mentioned that if you owed over $1,000 in taxes to the federal government last year, you should be paying estimated quarterly taxes. If your income is comparable or more, you definitely want to do that. If you had a big year where you got a big grant and then and you owed thousands of dollars, but this year you don't have that, or in 2021, let's say you didn't have that situation and your income was much lower, you may not need to pay estimated quarterly taxes. But if you're a freelancer and you have income and you and now you've owed in taxes in the past, it's a really good idea to pay estimated quarterly taxes, which basically means that for one quarter, you see what your net income was, which is going to be the amount of money you make minus whatever expenses you may have had. Figure out what tax you owe and then pay it in advance. You will be charged a penalty. My experience is they're not high, but if you don't want to pay more than you have to, pay estimated quarterly tax payments.
May I ask a question, please?
Sure.
What I used to do when I was employed, because of the quarterly and the estimated taxes and the regularity and all, I went to my employer and we did, I think it's called a W-4.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him to take out, I put on there a larger amount, like I'm making,
Yes.
So they take a much larger amount out, which meant I had an excess taken out each week out of my pay. And that way I didn't have to worry about paying attention to the quarterly reporting and the forms. At the end of the year, I actually had an overpayment for every year. And I did this for 20 years at least.
Mm-hmm.
Overpayment in the federal government, even though many people would tell me don't do that because you're like putting it in a savings account, but no interest. You'd be a lot better putting it, doing something, but that was too much paying attention for me. So
Yes.
I didn't do that. And my employer asked me, well, why do you want to do this? They're going to take out so much more taxes from your weekly income. And I didn't want to share my personal information that I was freelancing on the side. So I just said, it's a way of savings is what it is. And so he went along with it and he took out the maximum. But I did this for about 20 years and did not have to do the filing quarterly and to figure out the math and everything until the end of the year. And then I could find out how much. It was easy because it came written down right on my W-2 from him what the total amount was. And then I used that number for my final taxes. Now, doing it that many years, IRS never gave me a letter or a problem. So I assume that was a pretty good way of doing it. What do you think?
That was actually a very good way of doing it. And for people who have an employer who can do that, that's great. You could avoid the estimated tax payments because you have the extra amount taken out of your paycheck. I'd like to share my screen to show you the W-2 form that Elaine is talking about. I'm sorry, the W-4 form, not W-2. The W-4 looks like this. It used to be very simple. You would fill in your name and address and your social security. Well, you wouldn't need to put your social security. Yeah, you would, because this is for your employer. And you could just say, okay, I have 2 dependents, and so I'm going to have those deductions. They have decided, and this is a good thing, although it's more complicated, to make this a much longer form, where if you have multiple jobs, you can fill in information about your income from those jobs, which will help you to figure out how much you should actually have withheld from one or more of your paychecks, so that you won't end up owing at the end of the year. You won't be penalized. So this is a form you can find online. I'm not going to go into the detail of how to complete it. It looks really complicated, but if you read it carefully, it's not so bad. So if you have a W-2 job, like if you work in a coffee shop, in addition to doing your making your art on the side, then, or, I mean, your art may take up as much time as you work in the coffee shop. I don't want to say that if you work in a coffee shop, it's not that your art isn't just as important. It's probably more important. But if that happens, you can definitely avoid paying the quarterly taxes by having them withhold more from your paycheck. And that would all end up going in here. So anyway, I wanted to show you that form. When you do, sorry, hold on, let me just close this here. When you do that, you absolutely don't, as Elaine, you don't have to share with anybody why you're doing it. It's your private business. So you could just say, this is something I want to do. End of story. It is kind of a way of keeping you from spending money. And then you might get a refund at the end of the year, at the end of tax time, and then be able to go spend it on something. So, okay. Any other questions about different types of income?
Folks, and just to clarify, we will do a moment of questions and answers right now about this particular topic, which is different streams of income. And then we will move on to another topic, at the end of which we will have another opportunity for asking questions. So in order to make this easier to digest, because we understand that it's a lot of information, we will have moments for questions and answers throughout the session, okay? So if anyone has questions that are specifically related to income and how we, I guess, how do we declare the activity that we're doing? Like, in other words, like what's the art, what's the coffee shop, different streams of income. If anybody has questions about that, now would be a good moment to ask those. I see MP has raised their hand. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to understand if that form is used to self-report your income, meaning that at that point you become you're producing your own work, therefore you are the boss of your own work?
Right.
Or do you have to have a boss?
So for the W-4 form, if you have a boss, that's what you will complete for them. I'm going to share my screen again and show you the form that you should.
So it can be any employer.
Any employer, sure.
Yeah,
If you are considered an employee, which means they have more control over your work. If you are working as an independent contractor, if you're not employed by someone, if you're a contract worker, if you have been given a commission to do a particular work, then The W-9 form is what you would complete, which basically just asks for your name, address, social security number. And most of you would say that you're an individual or sole proprietor or a single member LLC. Probably not anything any you need to worry about. But this is the form. So if you are getting paid by an organization to do your work, they should be giving you one of these if you are going to be paid $600 or more. That by law, they have to provide a form 1099 to you at the end of the year, well, at the beginning of the tax preparation season in January. So right now, you should be receiving tax forms from employers, which would be W-2s, and I'll bring that up. And also from people who contract you for your work. And that would be a 1099. So let me show you what a W-2 looks like, in case there's any question about that. Sorry. A W-2 shows a bunch of information that you need to be able to show on your tax return. The employer has an identification number, and you have the employer's name and address. And then they need to provide your name and address and your social security number on this form because it gets submitted to the IRS. The W-4 and the W-9 do not get submitted to the IRS. They're for purposes of providing the correct paperwork at the end of the year. And when it comes to a W-2 and filling out a W-4, it's so they withhold the correct amount of taxes from your paycheck. So this form shows what total compensation you got, and then it shows all the different kinds of income taxes that have been withheld, both federally and for the state. So that's the kind of thing you would expect to see if you are an employee.
MP, does that answer your question?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
so if I in my school at my university I get a W-2, I could petition to them to do a W-4 to add on additional compensation. Correct?
Yes, that is correct. That
Thank
is
you.
correct. I want to show you briefly also what a 1099 looks like. You all may have seen this before, but I want to make sure that I don't leave it out in case it's something that that you're not familiar with. So a 1099 will have the same kind of information about the employer and about you here. And there will be one line that will be completed that has your non-employee compensation. So let's say you were commissioned by a city to do a sculpture and they paid you $10,000 to do it. $10,000 would show up on this line. Generally, they don't withhold income tax of any kind, federal income tax or state income tax. If they do, it goes on here. They've paid it. You don't have to. But generally, they won't be doing that.
Juliana, I want to share a question that Kounian is asking on the chat. They're asking, contract is 1099 followed. Yes. Okay. Followed by I have to report grants. I've received 2, and I think that's sort of the same question that Zaidi is asking. What about residency grants? It seems like those are what happens with grants. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Well, different grantors fit into different boxes. If you are required to report the income, when you get the grant, they should tell you that. And then they should send you a 1099 form, a 1099 NEC, which is non-employee compensation. So that shows exactly how much money they gave you. There are some kinds of grants that are for education or specifically for travel, for example. You may be doing a photography project where you have to do some travel and you got a grant for it. If you spend all the money that you got in that grant for the intended purpose of that particular grant, it may not be taxable. It may not be taxable. Partly because it's money come in and money that's gone out and it's all spent. But it's a specific kind of grant, so there are different things. We'll talk about where on the tax form your income gets reported when you are a contractor or an independent artist. But there are some grants, for example, the Pew Foundation, which is located in Philadelphia, when they give grants, that income is reported in a different place on your tax return than where you would report other kinds of self-employed income. And that's a particular type of grant. I think it's actually the Pew Fellowship. Is that right? Yes, it's the Pew Fellowship. So if you were to get a Pew Fellowship grant, you wouldn't be taking tax deductions from that. You would have to report it in a very specific place. And they're very good about saying, when you get this grant, this is going to be taxable. Be sure to put money aside from this so that you can pay your taxes on it. So residency grants, they should be supplying you with a 1099 if that money's tax deductible or taxable, and they should be letting you know. Generally, yes, grants are taxable and you must report them.
And just for context, the Pew Fellowship is a non-strings attached fellowship that the Pew Foundation offers to artists in Philadelphia. And I think the equivalent in Rhode Island, it's the McCall Johnson Fellowship, which also offers non-strings attached grant fellowship money for a given year. I see Zadie has raised their hand. Juliana, I know we are closing time to the end of this Q&A section, but do we have time for another question? Yeah,
sure.
Zadie, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It'll just be a quick one. I just wasn't sure if there was a difference between a grant and a stipend, or is that basically the same thing?
It's a stipend is like being paid to do work, but you're not an employee. So it's not like a salary or an hourly wage. They're just saying, you're going to do this work for us, however much time it takes, or maybe they're paying you by the hour, but they're calling it a stipend. And there was a question about whether or not it has to be, whether or not they have to give you a 1099 form if you earn less than $600. So if you got a stipend of $200 for doing something for somebody, they may not send you a 1099 form because they're only required to send you a 1099 if it's $600 or more. It doesn't mean that the IRS or the state don't expect you to report that income. They're just not required to file a 1099 with the IRS and send you one for your taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, I think we tapped to a lot of questions, and perhaps we are feeling ready to move on to the next section where Juliana is going to talk to us about what can we actually take as a deduction from the practice that we have as an artist, which is an important component too, right? Because we spend money to create art. We need to buy paper, buy ink, buy any kinds of tools. But what happens with those expenses? Juliana, do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure, yes. There are a lot of things you can spend money on that are work related, that are tax deductible. And I know that somebody else, I think, entered the room, and I don't know if they're still there. Maybe they're not still there. I was going to mention that with the PPP loans, even if you have that money and you don't, if you got that money, you can still deduct all your business expenses, even though you're not reporting that as income. But that person is no longer here. So, all right. So if you work as an artist, as an independent contractor, there are many things you might spend money on. You might spend money on office supplies. You might spend money on renting a studio space or a rehearsal space. You might spend money on the internet that you have to use to get your job done. Or perhaps your phone is something that you use for work all the time. You can take a portion of your phone bill. You can take a portion of your internet. If it's home and you have a studio at home or home office, you can deduct a portion of that against your income. So that lowers your income. This group that I work with, we have a self-employed business expenses worksheet, which I will share with you now. It's also available in Spanish for those who would like to see it in Spanish. This is a list of many of the things that we have found that are expenses that artists have that they may want to consider deducting. You do not have to take every business expense that you have as a deduction. If you want to buy a house and you want to show higher income, just don't report everything. I had some people come to me who wanted someone to help them prepare their taxes because and they both had home offices that they had to use. And somehow that was disallowed by the IRS. They were audited. It was a horrible experience. And they said, I'm never doing that again. I'm never taking my home office deduction. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't. And it is actually allowed. So if you have an office or a studio in your house that is used just for that purpose, that the costs of that are deductible. Advertising, whether it's Facebook ads or business cards or flyers or some other kind of thing, a brochure, advertising is something that you can write off. If you take classes related to your art, let's say you take some art classes, you can deduct those expenses because they directly inform the work that you do. Contract labor, if you have people that you pay to help you mount something or to help you out in your studio, you can deduct those expenses, even if you don't pay them enough to give them a 1099 at the end of the year. There's a lot, I mean, you can see on this form, there's a lot of different things. Project expenses could be art supplies, canvases, lighting. It might be photography equipment. It might be props, costumes, if you work with a theater company. There's all kinds of things that could be considered that. Music. If you're teaching a class, let's say you're teaching an art class and you play music during the class and you have a, should I even say this, a Spotify account, you can deduct that. Or Apple, let's say you download music for Apple and you have music playing because that's part of the ambiance that you want to have in your class. Or if you use it for a theater production, or there's a lot of different things. If you hire an attorney or an accountant or someone like me to do tax prep or bookkeeping for you, those things are tax deductible. If you have a website, all the things that you have to buy for that, you may pay somebody to put it together for you. You may just have to pay for the domain and a monthly fee or something. Travel expenses. If I were doing this in person, I would be traveling to Rhode Island to do it. And that would be the cost of that travel for me would be tax deductible. If you have a commission and you have to travel to a place to do research or to actually mount a project, the expenses that are attached to that are tax deductible. I mentioned the home office. That's often the best way to take that is by saying what the square footage of your home is and the square footage of the office or studio space that you have is. And then you can take portions of the expenses that you have as tax deductions. Mileage. If you use a car a lot, for your job. I just spoke with an artist yesterday who has to do a lot of driving to and from her gallery. Actually, she takes a lot of public transportation to and from the gallery, to meetings with other artists. All that stuff is tax deductible because it's all very specifically related to her business. If you have bought a new computer, you can take that as a tax deduction, and you can decide whether you want to take all of it this year or whether you want to spread that out over several years, which is what the amortizable expenses at the bottom is. If you bought a building that to have a studio in, that would also be an amortizable expense, but may or may not apply for any of you. So anyway, this is a sheet that is available. Hernan can share it, I think, in the chat. And these are the kinds of things that are deductible as a business expense.
Yes, I can send an email, a follow-up email to the people who are in this room so that they get a copy. Right now, Zoom wouldn't let me share a document. So I will just do it via email when we get off the call. Julie, we do have a few questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Can I read them in the order that we
Mm-hmm.
received them?
Sure.
Okay, so the first question was about the tax software. Serena is asking, if you are using tax software for all your taxes, personal and business, could you deduct the whole cost as an expense or half?
You can deduct the whole thing, especially if your business expenses are going on your personal tax return because you are a single proprietor. That goes on your personal tax return, so you can deduct all of it.
Oh, that's cool. I was trying to find the answer online and I got like, some people said half and others said the whole thing. And I was like,
No, I don't. Sometimes this is a judgment call. Are they gonna ask you about that? If you're audited, and the odds are you won't be, unless there's a lot of red flags. Some audits are completely random, but if you're audited, they're not likely to say, was this amount, this $29.99 you paid to TurboTax, was that for your business or just for yourself? So
they're more
yeah.
likely to question if there's like a lot of meals or expenses like that.
Right.
A little bit more like, oh, that sounds fun.
Right. Yes. So this artist that I talked with yesterday, who is just out of college and is doing quite well, asked me about meals because she does a lot of meetings with artists that have gallery shows together. She also pays her partner to help her in her studio, setting up walls and moving things around. And she was asking, if I buy lunch for us when we're working together, is that a deductible expense? My answer is no, because you're going to buy lunch anyway. And this person's your partner. If they weren't your partner, maybe you wouldn't be buying them lunch. So if it was a meeting that was necessary, if you say, let's meet for lunch because I want to talk to you about this show, or I want to talk to you about how we're going to change things in my studio, that's one thing. But if you're just working and you get hungry and you say, hey, I'll get you lunch, that's not a business meal.
Thank you for
Because you
sharing
need-
that, Julie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to also ask something that MP has dropped in the chat. And I think we may need some clarification, MP. They're asking, but for how long can you claim those? Is there a fine?
Oh, okay. Yes, sorry. She was mentioning all these deductions, and I was wondering if those deductions are something that you can claim for 1, 2, 3, up to 5 years in the way that I had done it in the past. What happens after 5 years? Why am I not able to continue to claim those?
Well, so generally you can deduct expenses that happen in the year that you incur those expenses. So when you
Yeah.
paid your bill, whether you paid directly to, or it was on a credit card, when you incur those expenses, that's when you deduct it. There are certain things like a big expense, like a computer, for example, that has a certain what they consider a depreciation
Yes.
lifespan, right?
Mhm.
So it may be something that you can deduct over a period of
At
5
some
years.
point,
Yes,
correct.
yeah.
But for instance,
That's
if,
bigger expenses, like more than $500 or so.
but if you continue to be an artist for now until you retire,
Mhm.
can you continue to deduct your materials on a yearly basis? Or at some point, because you don't make money as an artist, those are not a valid deduction?
They're a valid deduction if you have income, and it can be considered a business. And I think that was another question
Yeah.
that we had earlier, a business versus hobby. And I think setting up, how do you set up the business? The IRS would like to see you have a business bank account. They would like to see you have a sort of formalized way that you're keeping track of income and expenses. It could be a spreadsheet, Google Docs or Excel. It could be something like some of the free bookkeeping software like Wave that you can find on the internet. It could be something like QuickBooks where you pay a monthly subscription fee for it. But that shows that you are keeping good track of your income and expenses like a business person.
Okay.
They don't, if you have losses over a certain number of years, or you don't have, or you're not making a whole lot of money over a certain number of years, usually it's like 3, then they're starting to think this isn't a business. Some of it has to do with your intention, and that's a kind of a subjective thing. But if you have a full-time job and you do some other stuff on the side that you're not really serious about, and you just, oh, I'll make a little extra money doing this, they would probably consider that a hobby. But if you do things like set up the bank account and the financial records that you need, and even if you register as a business in your state, that can help too.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, Serena said you need to have a profit motive. Yes. You need to have a profit motive to have it be considered a business.
There was something else, Serena, that you asked earlier. Maybe this was clarification that you were seeking about deductions versus a loss. Do you want to expand on that, or was that answered already?
Sort of. I just was curious if MP was talking about deductions or a loss, because those are 2 different things. So that's where I was trying to clarify, because I know there's like so many different terms and it can get confusing. Like business deductions you can take and they reduce your profit, but a loss would be if you have more expenses than you have income. So
Yeah.
2 different concepts.
Very good. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
This is Christy. I'm in the same boat where I have a day job. So, but I've done it, set it up as a business. I have like the Excel sheets. I registered the business with the state and the federal, but I'm not making any money. So and it's been 3 to 5 years, especially with the last years with COVID. I barely did anything because all my classes were canceled. My shows were canceled, you name it. And it sounds like I should probably file as a hobby and switch it. I have been filing as a business, and I thought I could justify that. I did try. It's just that at this point, I'm not sure that they wouldn't. I mean, I'm not expensing astronomical expenses, but I mean, our supplies add up. So that's where I'm trying to. I don't want to get in trouble with the IRS. So would I be safer as a hobby?
You probably would be safer as a hobby.
Okay.
If you got to a place where things were looking up, you were having shows, you were selling things, then
Mm.
you might consider then starting to file as a business again.
Okay.
But
Can't switch.
I mean, the pandemic kind of complicated things, right? A lot of things stopped.
Yep.
So people didn't have income. I think that one of the reasons that the IRS is asking people to report whether or not they got a PPP loan, even though it's not taxable, is because that shows that they were missing income,
Mhm.
presumably, and they were relying on the government to make up for that missing income
Right.
through this loan so that they could continue to do their work.
Yep.
And there were artists and arts organizations that took advantage of that. And there were other kinds of small businesses that took advantage of that as well. So because business slowed down or stopped for a lot of people, I think the pandemic kind of, that complicates things for taxes a little bit. And I would think that the IRS should be more understanding about those years, but I honestly don't know if they will be.
Okay. And if I can switch back and forth, that it does answer one of my questions. So thank you so much.
Are there any other questions about deductions before we move on to a different segment here? Are we good? Yeah, we feel good about what
Yes.
deductions are? Yeah. Awesome.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I wanted to show you, actually, I wanted to mention a couple of other types of deductions that aren't business deductions, but that you should be aware of on your tax return. Well, a couple of times, there's essentially charitable contributions. That's what I want to talk about. For 2020, I think because of the pandemic, but it's hard to say. The IRS decided to allow people who didn't itemize their deductions, and some people don't, and I'll try to explain this a little bit. But you could still deduct as an individual $300 worth of cash donations to a nonprofit organization. This year, you can, if you're married filing jointly, you can deduct $600 without having to fill out a Schedule A, which is itemizing deductions, which includes things like mortgage interest and property taxes and a variety of different things that go onto a Schedule A. But that's something you should keep in mind, and you should definitely, if you make those charitable deductions, one thing you need to know is that they must be to 501c3 not-for-profit organizations. You can make a gift through a GoFundMe, but that's not tax deductible. If you get money through a GoFundMe, that money is not taxable either because it is considered to be a gift. So that's kind of nice because a lot of people during the pandemic had GoFundMes set up to help them to survive, to pay their rent or whatever. So this is just another little thing I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you also what a Schedule C looks like, because this is the form that on your tax documents that that you'll complete or that someone will complete for you. So I just want to real quickly show you that. So this is what a Schedule C looks like. It is part of your tax return. They have different codes for different types of businesses. A lot of the arts have one code, but that's something you need to have in there. And your Schedule C basically shows anything that you received a 1099 for, plus anything that any money that you made that was not where you didn't get a 1099. Anything that you need to report that you don't have a form for, you still have to report it on this line. And then if you have costs of goods sold, this happens mostly with people like photographers and jewelers and businesses that make widgets. But as far as artists go, when you have objects that you're selling or products that you're selling on a regular basis, you may have costs of goods sold. Otherwise, there are all these potential deductions that are included on that deductions worksheet that we have that go on here. And it basically, and there's an option for you to include business use of your home, whether it's a home office or a studio. Again, those have to be used only for business. You can't have a studio that's also your bedroom and take that as a deduction. But the Schedule C is basically this form. And there's also something called the QBI, which is qualified business income. And one of the few things that I personally think was okay about the tax cuts that happened in 2017 was that you could deduct 10% of your qualified business income. So it was not taxable. One of the few things. So as we're now looking at actually preparing to file taxes and how that works. We talked about the fact that there are statements you might receive like a W-2 or a 1099. If you have Obamacare, a 1095A is something that you will either receive in the mail or you can access online. You must report that information on your tax return. If you have royalties, if you're a writer and you publish something and you get royalties, or you're an actor and you made a movie and you get royalties from that, you'll get a 1099 miscellaneous. If you have interest income, dividends, if you are lucky enough to have stocks and bonds where you have capital gains, if you had unemployment, somebody said that they were doing some sales online and any income you receive from them should be put onto a 1099K. You should receive a 1099K from that organization, PayPal, Etsy, whatever other Square. They would send you a 1099K. If you got a distribution, or let's say you inherited something from a parent, like an IRA or some other kind of pension plan, you would get a 1099R. So there's all kinds of forms that you might get. This year there are forms, there's a letter that you should get for the stimulus payments that hopefully you received from the government, so that you have a record of exactly how much money they actually paid you in case you don't remember, or you can check your bank account because they will ask you, did you get the stimulus payment? How much did you get? If you didn't get it, they'll give it to you as a tax refund or as a credit on your return. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this because I just wanted to show that there are a lot of different possible forms you might get. Let's see. There are a number of ways to actually file your taxes. You can do something like TurboTax online. There is an IRS site, or on the IRS, you can file your taxes for free. There are other places like Tax Act and H&R Block that if your returns are very, very simple, like if you have a W-2 job and nothing else, those are places you can go where it's absolutely free. TurboTax, I think you can file for free with the federal government, but you have to pay for the state. I'm not sure, it's changed.
Do you know? I want to clarify on that because TurboTax is a little bit tricky. If you are trying to deduct your expenses, you will have to pay for their services. Otherwise, you might be able to get away with using it for free. But if you're an artist and you want to claim your expenses and have them deducted, you probably would have to pay.
And that is also true of H&R Block and Tax Act and all the services out there, except for the IRS site, where they say you can file for free. That's only if your returns are very simple. But if you have a Schedule C and you have deductions that you want to take, don't use that software because it will just mess you up. Oh, TurboTax dropped out of Free File this year. All right. Yeah, even though their advertising says you can. That's a very interesting and useful piece of information. Thank you, Serena. I did not know that. They still list free filing when I did a search to like just see what kinds of expenses there were.
I saw that. I saw that and I was like, what? Because I used them last year. So they sent me an email this year being like, hi, we've decided to explore other things that will benefit people. So we're dropping out of Free File. And I was like,
Right.
really? H&R Block did that to me the year before. They was like, oh, this is so easy and great. And then they drop out. And then TurboTax is so easy and great. And then they drop out.
Yeah. It's I mean, they're not in it to give things away. they're in it to make money, right? So if they can do that and pretend that they're doing it for the public, then makes them look good, or at least makes them sound good. So yeah. So
I wanted to offer to Juliana, if this is okay, because you do work with this group of people that have a good understanding of the arts. The Philly for, what is it called again, please?
Philly Tax Prep for Artists.com.
So there is information, there's a series of different preparers that could potentially help you. There's a reason why we're doing this workshop right now, is to give us time to prepare so that you look at the different options and you can explore options online. But also, I think it's worth exploring what would it look like to work with someone to do this. And yeah, I think in my own personal experience, I've learned a lot from doing taxes on my own, but I'm also learning a lot now doing it with a person. So it's just, this session is meant to highlight different options available to you. As Juliana has mentioned, the Ira Is website, other specific TurboTax and H&R as well, but also filing with a person might be not as expensive as one can think of. I just want to say that because I was always afraid of contacting someone because I thought it was going to be more expensive than I could afford. But in reality, what TurboTax ended up charging brought it up to about the same. So it's just an encouragement for you all to seek out different options and choose what's more suited for you. I see MP has raised your hand if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, but I also wanted to share that in the way that it is useful is sometimes you may have an accountant that is not as familiar with the life of an artist, and you can help him navigate or help her navigate a little bit of like the options and have that person understand a little bit of a wider scope.
Yes, and one thing I would mention is that most people don't actually need a CPA to do their tax returns. A CPA is going to cost a whole lot more. I have a client who came to me several years ago who their taxes were not particularly difficult, but they were paying $800 to get their tax return done. And they were married filing jointly, a few deductions for one of the jobs that was, but my group, we charge half that for married filing jointly. And if you come to us early, we even have an early bird discount. So, and we also, and there may be others that do this as well, but because we are a group of people who are either artists or love the arts and work with artists, we do things like provide tax prep at a discount if you are on Medicaid. If you cannot afford to have our prices, And we'll know when we do your returns, whether or not it's true. But, we tend to trust the people that we're working with. If they're trusting us, we're going to trust them. And so we may charge one person $250 for a return and somebody else might pay $100. We are people who are professionals and have been doing this for a while, and we've all had training, and we have each other as resources, which is really great. And we actually even share clients sometimes. But we believe that when we're doing this for artists, we want to keep the prices low. And for people who make a lot more money, they may be in the arts, but they may make a lot more money, and they may say, I'm going to pay you extra to help subsidize somebody else. So that's kind of nice too, because this is how I make my living. So I want to get paid for it, but I'm also, and people tell me, oh, you shouldn't do that. I give away a lot of advice for free. And for me, it's just like, I want to be helpful. And maybe that person is going to come to me to get their taxes prepared, and that's great. And I can help them, and they can help me. So there is a group in New York, or there is a person in New York, I should say, but I haven't been able to retrieve their name, that also does a lot of tax prep for independent contractors, a lot of artists. But I like I said, I haven't been able to retrieve their name. But I mean, there are people, there are services out there. I just think that what our group does for artists is what it means to be an artist. We understand the ins and outs of all the various deductions and types of income and things. So anyway, yeah.
Juliana, I know we're getting close to time, but I want to ask you if you want to briefly address what an IRA is, just so that folks put that on their radar. And then if we have time, we will take 1 or 2 questions before closing.
Sure. So one of the things that people ask me about on a regular basis is whether or not they should open an IRA. Some of you are older, like me, and some of you are younger. Some of you may be in the middle. I can't see you. But I encourage everybody to have some kind of savings for retirement. You can start out with $100 and contribute $50 a month, or $5 a month, or whatever you feel like you can do. And that will help you later on, especially when you're in the arts and you may not be making as much money as people who are working for some big corporation someplace, who have a 401k plan and they're just going to be fine. Your Social Security payment may be lower because you don't have really high income. And it's just a good idea to have something in retirement. Some people are concerned about investing in the stock market because corporations are evil. And I tend to move towards the idea that capitalism isn't the best system in the world, but that's the one we live in. But there are socially responsible investment funds. I have read about some of them. One of the things that Hernan will share with you is a few samples of the kinds of things you can invest in that are socially responsible. There are people who say, oh, they're not really, they're just saying that. But I think the movement is towards more and more of that. So if you're holding off on investing because you think you don't want to give companies money that are evil, there are ways to invest that actually do good for you as well as for the world.
And that might be identifying values and aligning those with companies or places that you can feel identified with. So I think it's worth perhaps the research for that. And yes, Juliana and I will connect to then share a list of resources with you all, along with the list of deductions. Juliana, do you have anything else you'd like to say, or shall we give some time for questions?
Well, I see a question here from Cole. One thing I didn't say is there's several different kinds of IRAs. There's a traditional IRA, which basically means it's tax deductible in the year that you make the contributions. So if you contribute $6,000 in 1 year to a to a traditional IRA, that's $6,000 that's deductible from your income on your tax return. A Roth IRA, you pay taxes on that money now, but when you take the money out, none of it is taxable. So they don't tax you again on the money that you've already, on what you've paid, and the growth that happens, hopefully, in that IRA, you don't get taxed on that either. There are reasons to do both. There's also a Sep IRA, which is, I'm sorry, I can't remember what it's called, but employers can have Sep IRAs for the employees. You as an independent contractor can have a Sep IRA that you can invest in, and you can invest 25% of your income in a Sep IRA. And like a traditional IRA, that is tax deductible when you make the contribution. If you also have a job that has a retirement plan, it gets a little more complicated, but yeah, if that's a question that you have, I recommend talking to somebody who knows a lot about investing in IRAs. I mean, a tax preparer can give you some advice. And like when I do my taxes, or when I do taxes for people, some people will ask me, once this is said and done, can you tell me how much I can legally contribute to my IRA? So that'll come out based on your income and a variety of other factors. But Co asked, if I have a Roth IRA, should I wait to contribute to it after I do my taxes, since my art income hasn't been taxed yet? I got the Roth a few years ago while I had a traditional job. After the pandemic, I ended up earning my money the non-traditional way. You don't have to wait. You can contribute to a Roth IRA anytime, whether it's something that you had through another job or not. You can always contribute to a Roth. That is separate from any kind of specific employment situation that you're in. You have to earn money to contribute to a Roth, but you can contribute at any point during the year. And because what you have is a Roth IRA, it's not tax deductible. It doesn't really matter when you do it. The IRS does want you to report that on your tax return, because as I said, how much you can actually contribute is based on your income. But if you're not really high income, that's not generally going to be an issue.
Any other questions that folks may have at this moment? If not, I will take a moment to express gratitude to Juliana, to Julie, for sharing her knowledge about this dry topic. But I hope that we could clarify some parts of the process. And I want to also thank each one of you for showing up to the space and turning on your cameras, being present with us to create a little bit of a gathering that I know is not the same as being in person, but it is what we have right now. So it's important to be as present in any way we can. It is a way, I think, to keep creating community and keep sharing resources and getting to know each other a little bit. So I really appreciate everyone's participation. I also want to share that next Friday, 4th of February, we will have a session with artist Kei Fumiharu Aileru talking about curating in community. This is about how to integrate the needs of our communities into our artistic practice. So if you're interested in that, please take a moment to sign up for that. It will be at the same time. And with that, I want to thank you again for everyone. Juliana, if you want to say a few last words, I think now is a good moment for that.
I want to say thank you to all of you for showing up. We're not getting a lot of snow here, but you may be getting a lot there. So this is a good way to do it. But it's really nice to see you. Thank you, Serena, for actually making art while we were doing it. That was really great.
Yay.
So thank you very much. Feel free to reach out to Hernan or to me if you have any more questions or if you need any help.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks.
Goodbye now.
Bye.
Bye.